York's classic rock. Q1043.
Chris Jericho is here with us this morning at Q104.3.
I'm here.
Welcome.
Thank you. Legendary Jim Kerr. Excited to be here.
Legendary Chris Jericho. I mean, not only one of the world's greatest pro wrestlers, but also one of the world's great rock stars.
Well, I don't know about that in either case, but it's been a good couple of years for both. Especially here in New York City, always a great time to come and hang out and do shows here. It's been great for Fozzy, it's been great for AEW, it's been great for Chris Jericho.
Well, Fozzy, 500,000 units of Judas.
Yeah.
That made it a gold record.
Gold record, man, yeah.
Did you have the ceremony?
We actually did here at the Gramercy in New York City. We had the record company come and give us the gold record, which was really cool. And then you figure out who you want to send them to, the actual plaques, you know what I mean? So I think it was just pretty cool in this day and age in 2022 to be able to get a gold record.
And where's yours?
Well, Shelley, like what he just said.
Yeah, it's really true.
It's beyond
well,
amazing.
the thing is, too, so 500,000 units is a gold record.
Yeah.
But nowadays, it's not just the units sold. They also put streams in there. And to get 500,000 sales, the equivalent is 75 million streams. To show you how crazy things are for bands nowadays. So, to get that gold disc and put it up on my wall was a really cool moment for me, for sure. Definitely a dream come true moment.
Which wall? Where is it?
In my office, right across from, like, if I was sitting here talking to you, it's right over there so I can look at it at all times.
So be inspired
yes,
every
exactly.
day by
Be inspired
the gold.
by it, yeah.
Well, you have to be, and because, to be really honest, it's really rare in today's world.
Right.
It really is. I mean, it's like Taylor Swift and a few other people
But the thing
are
is,
able to sell records.
Taylor
that's about
Swift
it.
would go like double platinum or triple platinum. Meanwhile, 10 years ago, it would have been 10 million. Or,
Right.
You know what I mean? So the whole way that people consume music is so different now. And like I said, just to get that kind of validation, because we had heard about a year and a half prior that with the amount of streams we were doing that it was going to go gold. And you're like, what? Like, seriously? Like an actual gold record? So to actually see that and get it's cool, A, because it is a dream come true, and B, it kind of really shuts up all the haters. Like, if there's any more problems you have with Chris Jericho being in a band, I now have a gold record to say you're wrong.
Right, and you're not just in a band; you front the band.
Front the band, but we've been doing it for about 20 years, a little bit over 20 years. So I have a partner in crime, Rich Ward. So it's definitely a Mick and Keith situation. It's not just Chris Jericho and his band of merry men. I'd like to say I'm talented enough to do it all myself, but I'm not. So it's good to have a good partner to play with.
And Q104.3 listeners have, of course, heard your band through the years on Friday Night Rocks with Eddie Trunk.
Eddie Trunk, yeah, always a big supporter of Fozzy since the very first record back in 2002, I think. So, and like I said, New York City's just a great rock and roll town. We've played so many venues here, from Irving Plaza to the Gramercy to like little clubs and everywhere else in between. So it's a great rock and roll city, as you know, and we always love playing here. It's always one of the best shows on the tour.
Chris Jericho is with us. So who are your favorite bands?
Well, I mean, it's funny. Like, we were just driving over here, and the Stones came on, Q104. Just can't go wrong with the Stones. Still love the Stones. Obviously, Metallica, Maiden, those types of bands are up there too. I really love Avenged Sevenfold as far as newer bands go. Greta Van Fleet. So
They just sold out Madison Square Garden.
that's unbelievable, and it's great for rock and roll. I mean, those dudes are. You're talking about Avenged or Greta Van Fleet?
Greta Van Fleet.
Yeah, I mean, they're like early 20s.
Yeah, and they're
It's
playing
unbelievable.
guitars.
I know.
And it's selling out Madison Square
and that's
Garden.
great for rock and roll.
Yep.
Avenged Sevenfold too sold out Madison Square Garden. So when you can get those bands that can sell at the Garden in this day and age, because once again, not easy for rock and roll bands to do that. There's so much country and pop music that's doing so well. Rock and roll's always kind of takes, not a back seat, but it's always kind of like the stepchild that's hanging on for dear life, according to what people say, and then Greta comes and sells at Madison Square Garden. You're like, who the hell are these guys? And that's good. That's good for everybody.
And how does it mesh with your pro wrestling career?
Well, I mean, there's always kind of there's a lot of relations between wrestling and rock and roll. It's all based around the energy that you get from the audience and the crowd. There's a certain connection that you have to have as the front man of a band or as a wrestler in the ring, that if you can get people's attention and get that connection with them, they'll always come and see you. And that's kind of high energy, very electric. And there's a lot of things about a wrestling show, about an AEW show that mirrors a rock and roll show. Lights and smoke and lasers and bombs and concussions and hot chicks and hot dudes and all that sort of thing. But with wrestling, there's a little bit more of a story behind it. You know, I always kind of say it's a modern day morality play. If Shakespeare was alive today, he'd probably be writing wrestling shows.
Well, you know, we had a very good friend back, like before you were born, when you were just a child. Mm-hmm. We had a very good friend, Bob Remus, who was known as Sergeant
Slaughter, absolutely.
We were actually in one of his videos.
And,
oh, wow.
And Sergeant Slaughter, you know, was a good guy, but then he had to be a bad guy.
Right.
And then a good guy again.
Sure.
But this guy who, I mean, I took him to lunch once and he ate multiple burgers. I picked up the tab. It was a big tab. But he was just the gentlest, sweetest, soft-spoken guy.
Like a gentle bear.
Well, I mean, and that's the thing. You know, you're playing a character when you're in wrestling. You know, absolutely. You know, I there was times where people would attack me on the street. You know, when I was really at the peak of being this bad guy, and people couldn't figure out the difference between reality and playing a character. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes I would meet people and they'd be like, "Oh man, we thought you'd be such a jerk, but you're a really nice guy." And I was like, "Well, you know, Anthony Hopkins doesn't walk down the street eating people's livers with a fine Chianti.
Right.
It's not really Hannibal Lecter. It's just a guy character that he's playing, you know." So I think the best wrestlers play those characters as if you are, you know, going out to win an Oscar. Mm-hmm. And once again, that's connecting with the audience to really get them to believe what you're doing. You know, we go to the movies and we know it's not real. Mm-hmm. You know, you go to see, I don't know, Pirates of the Caribbean. You know, Johnny Depp's not really a pirate, you know, in the 16th century, but you watch the movie and you get into it and you really appreciate the characters and the storylines and kind of let yourself go into the whole, you know, to the whole experience. And that's what pro wrestling is.
Did you go to any matches when you were a kid?
Oh, yeah. I was a huge fan.
Who were your heroes?
Well, I grew up in Winnipeg, Canada. So WWF was really popular. I loved Hulk Hogan. I loved Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, those types of guys. But Winnipeg was a big wrestling town. It was a big rock and roll town, too. It always has been. Mm-hmm. Since I was a kid, all I remember is hockey, wrestling, rock and roll. And all those things kind of are very similar if you look into it that way.
And, you know, wrestling had a very important role in the very early days of television here in the United States.
Right.
Wrestling was on almost every night.
It's on almost every night now.
No, but I mean local wrestling in local markets. They didn't even have the networks built up yet.
Right.
And there would be wrestling matches in your town that would be on TV.
Right.
And a lot of people didn't own TVs at the time, so they would go to the local taverns and on these little black and white TVs watch the wrestling matches.
Right.
And so there were regional wrestling superstars.
Yeah. That's the way it used to be back in those days. That changed kind of in the 80s when WWF kind of became the national company and basically stayed that way for 20 years until our company AEW started. So now you have an alternative of both national companies.
And AEW stands for All Elite Wrestling.
All Elite Wrestling, yeah. We're here at Arthur Ashe Stadium tonight. It's kind of our arena. This is the third time we've had a show here. And no one's ever had wrestling at Arthur Ashe before. It's a big, giant tennis stadium, but it's perfect for wrestling because the seats kind of go straight up, so the crowd's on top of you. Mm-hmm. And it's very cool that we kind of discovered it. You know, it's not Madison Square Garden or it's not the Barclays Center. It's Arthur Ashe. So when you think wrestling with AEW in New York City, it's synonymous with that stadium.
Well, we'll hear all about tonight's show when we come back. Chris Jericho is with us here at Q104.3.
Oh yeah,
we are so happy to have Chris Jericho of AEW's Dynamite Rampage.
Yes.
Did I say that right? AEW Dynamite Rampage.
Well, 2 separate shows: AEW Dynamite and Rampage.
AEW Dynamite and Rampage.
Nailed it, Jim.
All right. And Chris Jericho is here. So you've got a big match with Sammy Guevara.
I do. Sammy Guevara, yeah. And that's what wrestling's all about, is the stories that we're telling, you know. Like I mentioned earlier about watching a good movie. So,
well, it's also the skill and the athleticism.
It is, but if you don't have the stories and the characters, it's just two half-naked guys, you know, slathered in oil, rolling around with each other. And you can go online and see that if you want. This is different because the story that for example, with Sammy and I, we've kind of been together for 4 years. So it's kind of this 4-year match in the making, and that's the thing with our fans. They would be excited about this because of the long-term stories that we told with that. So that's what really engages people and hooks them into becoming longtime fans.
And you're the superstar. You are. You're the superstar, right? Wednesday night on TBS. You're the.
Well, I mean, with others.
But you're the big guy.
Well,
There's
I've been
the
in-
Jericho Appreciation Society.
Well, you're an honorary member, Jim. But yeah, I mean, I think when we started AEW like 4 years ago, it's something that I'd worked for Vince McMahon for almost 20 years, and WWE is such a monopoly that when AEW started and right out of the gate was a huge success. I was kind of the face of the company at the very beginning, but I also knew right out of the gate that I had to make as many other stars as I could and help as much as I can, because it can't just all be on Chris Jericho's back. So I think we've done a great job of kind of creating our own homegrown stars, names like Darby Allin and MJF and Orange Cassidy, those types of guys, Britt Baker, and then we have Bryan Danielson and Jon Moxley and guys that came from WWE that joined me in AEW. It's just great for the fans, and it's great for the business when you have alternatives. You don't just want to have Coca-Cola, you want to have Pepsi too, and it just makes it for a better product for everybody.
Yeah, sometimes a little Royal Crown.
The Royal Crown dumped in both. And Royal Crown didn't even need the Coke or Pepsi. Let's be honest, Jim. This is rock and roll here.
Chris Jericho, when you were growing up, when you were a little boy, what did you want to be?
I wanted to be a wrestler, and I wanted to be in a rock and roll band.
No, you really did?
I did, and I wanted to be Indiana Jones. So 2 out of 3 ain't bad, and I ain't talking about Meatloaf. So I really did want to be. I wanted to be. I can remember wanting to get into wrestling when I was probably about 10 or 11, because once again watched it really religiously as a kid. My grandma got me into wrestling.
Your grandmother.
My grandma, yeah, and she was not. She hated the bad guys. She was screaming at the bad guys, and I secretly thought the bad guys were the coolest out of all of them. So I never told my grandma that I liked Jesse the Body Ventura, because she would be mad at me because she hated Jesse the Body Ventura.
He's a good friend of ours.
He's
too.
a great guy, right?
Oh, yeah.
He's awesome. Me too. But at the time, that seemed like my dad played pro hockey. My dad played for the Rangers.
Oh.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, Ted Irvin in the early 70s. So hockey was always part of my family, but hockey seemed like it was a team sport and guys wearing helmets and everyone's dressed the same, and it's like, all right, that's cool. But I liked wrestling where there was characters and individual, personalities, and you knew who each guy was, and I really kind of responded to that. Mm-hmm. And then really got into rock and roll as well, and loved kind of the flamboyant frontmen, because they had the same type of vibe that wrestlers did. David Lee Roth and Paul Stanley and Mick Jagger and Freddie Mercury and Bruce Dickinson, and those types of guys were like just as outgoing, and they could lead a crowd of 15,000 people the same way that Hulk Hogan could. So I thought, well, that'd be fun to do both of those things. How do you do that pre-internet? I don't know. You look at a magazine and write letters to the wrestling schools, and anxiously await when 4 weeks later you get a pamphlet sent back to you, like, come to Hart Brothers Pro Wrestling Camp in Calgary. You're like, oh my gosh, they sent me a pamphlet. But I mean, it was all kind of a really cool journey to get to where I am today, because I really did have these were my goals when I was a kid, literally.
So that's what you do? You go to wrestling camp first? That's like your entree?
Well, you did back then.
Yeah.
Now they're called performance centers. It's a much bigger, it's a big NFL type of a vibe. But wrestling school, or wrestling camp is kind of how it started. And I lived in Winnipeg, and there was one in Calgary that was run by the Hart family, who's a very famous pro wrestling family. And wrote them a letter, and they sent me a pamphlet, and then I wrote them a letter back, and then kind of enrolled that way. And that's kind of how you to think now it's so archaic, even though it was only 30 odd years ago. Now you just go online and type it in and, send them an email. That was not the case back then.
And Shelley, you looked a little surprised at something that Chris Jericho said, but traditionally, going all the way back to the beginning, and this is true, grandmas make up a big part of professional wrestling's fan base. Grandmas love it, don't they? It's not just yours. It's not just yours.
It's not
Grandmas,
quite.
You look at the TV ratings, and it is
No.
from kids
Yeah.
all the way up
That's true.
through.
Yeah, I wouldn't paint it as the arenas are filled with grandmas. It's kind of changed to where now I think the demographic is much younger. There's a lot of kids and young adults and that sort of thing. But back in the day, grandmas made up a big portion. They would sit in the front row with hat pins. And if you really made them angry, they'd stab you with the hat pins. So there used to be a lady in Winnipeg that would always stab me with a hat pin. And I was like, stop it.
Yikes.
Don't do that.
Well, the big show is at Arthur.
What is a hat pin anyway? Sorry, go ahead.
The big show is at Arthur Ashe Stadium tonight in Queens.
Yes.
And there are still some tickets available at Ticketmaster. And everybody can learn everything they want about you at chrisjericho.com. And
Really? I didn't even know that.
and what about the band?
We have
what's the band's?
Well, we're going
site?
back out again in October in the States. We're going back to the UK in February. We have a new song that's coming out very soon as well. Because that's the thing, Jim. It's like albums are becoming such a strange concept in this day and age. Like we put out a record about a year and change ago that we worked on for like 3 years because of the pandemic and everything like that. And 3 of the songs went top 10. 3 more of the songs go over great live, and the other 6 songs just kind of go to the dead song graveyard. And it's like these songs are all great songs. So I think what we're going to start doing is just releasing singles, releasing one song at a time, and just do that every 3 or 4 months to constantly have a song out there. And so we're getting ready to do that, release our new song in the next month or so.
Okay, you can follow him at Chris Jericho Fozzy on Instagram.
Yes, you can follow me there.
And chrisjericho.com. And remember, it's tonight.
Right.
The big AEW
Tonight.
show.
Say it right,
Yes.
Tim.
It's Dynamite, Rampage, Grand Slam.
Grand Slam. It's a party.
To the Arthur Ashe Stadium for the 3rd straight year.
It is, yeah.
And
Every
it's-
September in New York City, Arthur Ashe. It's an annual tradition.
It's tonight. Don't
Tonight.
miss it.
Don't miss
Tonight.
it. It's going to be the show of your lifetime. Don't be the kid or the guy or the girl that shows up at work or school tomorrow and people go, "Did you see Dynamite at Arthur Ashe?" You said, "No, I didn't go." And they call you like they shame you. Don't be that person. Come on down. Come hang out with us.
That's good. Okay.
Excellent.
Thank you.
New York's classic rock, Q1043.